Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Karen Weaver. The worlds of higher education and college athletics are changing so fast, it's dizzying. Those who work in the industry are hit with change seemingly every day. How are your students, your faculty, your coaches, and others handling all the challenges that exist in their world? Enter Real Response, originally a tool for college athletes to speak up and share their experiences with athletic administrators, has now evolved into a multi-purposed, multifaceted way to solve problems facing college campuses today, and not just in athletics. Leveraging the comfort that Gen Z has with texting on their phones, Real Response provides a way to give instant feedback on things like support staff, athletic training, strength and conditioning, and also to more complex, difficult to talk about areas like sexual assault, guns in the locker room, and inappropriate relationships. The end result may mean that administrators get to hear about these issues much earlier in the process, get them the help they need more quickly, and hopefully change the behavior sooner. I'm joined today by David Chadwick and Samantha K. Yugi. David is the CEO of Real Response, and Samantha is the Executive Vice President for Real Response in college athletics. Both bring important information to the table that allows presidents and leaders to learn about tools available to them to assess constituent feedback, get confidential information, and get ahead of potentially serious issues. Hi, Sam and David. It's so great to have you on the podcast today. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
We're thrilled to talk about so many great things today because Real Response has really evolved into a company that does many different things. Give us a sense of the background, either one of you can do this, about where Real Response came from.
Sure, I'll kick us off because the early days I was flying solo before I was blessed to have Samantha on our team. Again, thanks, Karen, for this opportunity. We're excited for this conversation today. So Real Response actually began as a class project. In 2012, I was a basketball student athlete. I did not even know what entrepreneurship was at the time, but I knew it was a class that settled a credit I needed to have to graduate. And during that class, I had to come up with an idea. And I found myself looking at my own experiences as a student athlete and hearing from many of my peers and friends as well, this continual frustration of student athletes not feeling like they had a way to speak up and to use their voice and to share everything from positive shout outs, things that are going well, to perhaps questions that people just didn't feel comfortable tagging their name to, perhaps just more general feedback or suggestion, and then obviously the more serious concerns that needed to be addressed. Certainly there was more what we like to call antiquated ways of gathering student athlete feedback. You did your eggs interview on the way out, or many administrators reinforced kind of this open door policy, but I saw how times were changing really quickly, especially during that specific year. It was the beginning of social media. I saw how more and more student athletes were living on their phone and using that as a way to communicate versus some of the ways that I had done in the past, and wanted to come up with a way for these student athletes to be able to, frankly, do that, better communicate with their administration. So I held on that idea for a few years. I transferred to Valparaiso in Indiana. I had an amazing experience at Valpo. The ironic part was it was a school that I had previously denied twice, citing all these reasons I didn't want to go. Weather, facilities, conference, even the uniform colors deterred me a little. The stuff that candidly I thought mattered when I was 17, but what I learned there that forever changed my life, and this is true to any environment, it's not just college athletics. What drives positive experiences are rarely the externals. It's usually the intangibles. It's the people, it's the culture, it's the relationships. I joke with people, the coaching staff that I played for at Valpo, I would have followed to any school in the country because I knew it was about them and the relationship with them. And it was not about the things that I thought mattered when I was being recruited. So I was getting my MBA my 5th year. So I did do my year of sitting out before when that was the normal thing to do. And got my MBA and focused on entrepreneurship, and I had to come up with an idea again. And I said, well, I'm not going to come up with a new one. I'm going to recycle that one from my class a few years ago, and really dove in. And I met with Mark LaBarbera, the athletic director there at the time. And I said, Mark, what do you think about this concept? And he was the first AD that really spoke to me and said, David, from an administrator's perspective, gathering feedback is extremely challenging from student athletes. They don't participate when we give them the way to speak up. We find out about stuff when it's way too late. It was interesting to have his perspective, having been in the student athlete seat and now talking to him directly. And then he used the magic phrase, if you could help me gather feedback from student athletes, I'd pay you. So I said, great, let me take a deeper dive into this. So I said, Mark, who are 3 ADs that you're friends with that you think would let me interview them? And he gave me 3 names, Barry Collar at Butler and others. So I called those folks, similar, asked them, how do you get feedback from your student athletes? What are the challenges? And then at the end of each call, I said, who are 3 of your friends that I could ask and interview as well? So literally over a year's period, and it was kind of that sprawling effect, I interviewed over 200 athletic directors. And it was really easy to get them on the phone when it was a class project because I was not selling them anything yet, keyword. And I heard continual themes from what Mark had said too. Again, this frustration. The most consistent thing I heard was, we need a better way for our student athletes to speak up. So we decided to chase after that endeavor, obviously, began as an end of year survey tool. So we built that first product. I went back to those ADs that I had really positive conversations with. And I said, hey, remember me? I interviewed you during that class project. I'd love to show you what this has become. And I was blessed to have a few athletic directors give me an opportunity. I'll never forget one of the first ADs that invited me to campus was Ron Wellman at Wake Forest, which was a short drive north of where I am in Charlotte. So tried to put on my my best looking suit and came in and gave a presentation to them. And afterwards, Ron said, hey, can you put together a proposal? So I made up a number and they came back to me and said, can we do this instead? And I said, absolutely yes. And it was off to the races from there. And in that first year, we worked with about a dozen schools, giving them a survey instrument so that after the student athletes completed their season, they could rate their experiences, everything from support areas, athletic training, strength and conditioning, to travel, to gear, to experiences with coaches, you name it. And then have a dashboard where they could immediately summarize and look at the results and not have to try to manipulate the data on their own and make sense of it. And what was really neat, is still a big part of our company today, is to begin to draw benchmarks. So how does your data compare against other schools that are similar size, similar sports, similar experiences, et cetera? Where are you doing really well? And we'll touch on this later with some of the questions I know you have planned. And where do you need to improve your efforts? I'll quickly tie this up and then we can obviously continue on. But what really changed the company trajectory forever was candidly unexpected. During that first year, the student athletes used that end of year survey to begin to bring forward really serious concerns, things that should have come out much, much earlier. Everything from hazing to sexual assault to teammates having guns, breaking into violations, inappropriate relationships between coaches and student athletes, you name it. The immediate response from these schools that we were working with was just this sudden realization of, we can't wait till end of year surveys anymore. Student athletes are bringing forward things that maybe happen in the middle of the season, for example. We need a mechanism for student athletes to be able to come forward at any time and raise these questions, feedback, concerns, et cetera, so that we can be responsive in a timely way. So we quickly iterated and expanded our product. We added a real-time mechanism so student athletes could come forward anytime. We then listened to our schools and they said, now we need a documentation tool so we can help manage our notes and cases and how these are being handled if this is ever scrutinized in the future. And just began this rapid expansion and focusing on what our customers needed and ultimately delivering value as a result, and grew in the collegiate athletic space and was really proud to be able to service not only the institutions that we were working with, but the student athletes as well. And going back to our roots of giving them that way to speak up and to use their voice. So probably a little bit of a longer explanation, but that was really the first 5 years of our business, beginning as that class project. And then once seeing an opportunity, significantly expanding right there in the collegiate space.
Well, I think it's fascinating that you had so many teams that were struggling, not just at the end of the season, but throughout the season. And so how you report that becomes valuable. So Samantha, let's talk about coaches' evaluations. Let's talk about some of the examples that you've seen.
Sure. Again, I'll reiterate what David said. Thank you for having us. Really excited to be with you today, Karen. So yes, utilizing real response in a coach's evaluation is one of the ways that one can use data in a coach's evaluation. But as I've often said as a leader, your evaluation shouldn't just be once a year, right? You don't want to surprise folks with stuff. You want to be able to, throughout the year, routinely provide feedback. I think all of us, regardless of the level we are in our professional careers, feedback can be a little scary. All right. You're like, wait a minute, what's going to be done with this feedback? How is it going to be utilized? Is it accurate? Who are they talking to? We get 360s as executives, those kind of things. And regardless of how confident you might be, there's that little thought like, what's going to happen here? And so when we had real response on two different campuses where I worked, we would say to the coaches, listen, this is one part of the equation. In fact, we often talk with clients on campus and our campus partners. I'll get the question, hey, how would you use this in a coach's evaluation? I'm always very cautious. I say, listen, this is a tool in your toolbox as you're evaluating. But I also would say that the feedback that comes in from student athletes can also be utilized for really positive things. One example that's been reiterated to me is a coach who was having a challenge in communication with the coach's team, right? We all talk about today's student athlete, right? David talked about it at the beginning where he said, they communicate through their phones almost more. And this skill set of face-to-face communication can be a challenge. And we are working in a multi-generational profession, right? We have coaches who perhaps could be someone's grandchild, to coaches who might be younger than the academic counselor who is working with their team. And so being able to really help and gather data that can be utilized to help a coach maybe communicate differently, maybe communicate more effectively, but then also we have an example where a coach had been saying to the administration, and in turn, the administration saying it to their campus, saying, hey, we really need changes in our locker room. It's affecting our recruiting. It's affecting, our student athlete well-being. And, it was said, okay, yeah, we'll get to it. It's on the list. Well, when that information came in through real response and through those surveys, it was in the student athlete's voice. And the athletic department was able to utilize that, show the data, and the changes were made to the locker room. And so something as simple as that. And then in coaches' evaluations, one of the ways that I was always careful to use it is I didn't want to share specificity that could be attributed to a certain student athlete, because student athletes might speak in a way that use words that a coach could identify. And so I would always pull out themes. I wouldn't pull out every single picky thing, right? Because we know, like, if you ask me about David on one day, I might say there's something about him that bothers me, right? But overall, I wouldn't work for anybody else, right? So I'm just, David, but anybody, any leader, anyone who is in a position where you are leading young people or leading in a business, they're going to be parts of how they do things. And so if it was a one-off or one person said it, I would say, you know what, let me look at themes. And so I would pull out themes, and I would always encourage our sport administrators to do the same things. And it makes coaches, and coaches who are responsive to it really are like, okay, great. And back to the point about the coach who was having challenges communicating with their team, I was able to share those themes. The coach it said, what do I do? I said, well, would you be open to meeting with the captains? Yes. And behavior was changed on both sides, and they had a terrific way going forward. Those are the positive. All in all, I think the feedback that we get is really helpful. It's really important. And for coaches to be successful, we got to meet our student athletes where they are and figure out ways to really make them successful.
So where does that content go? Once it's shared, you use an app, where does it go?
David, why don't you take that?
Sure. So the institution can decide how they want to set this up, and more specifically, the administrators that have access to the system. There may be some administrators that have access to the entire platform. We call them the super users, regardless of which sport is being surveyed or which sport has an anonymous communication that's sent through, they'd have access to it. Many institutions also set up their sport administrators for sport-specific access. So this person has access to just this specific sport, or perhaps a couple of sports. So it really becomes dual level of accountability. Something comes through, that sport administrator has access, as does the super user of the platform. Oftentimes there's other levels of access, other administrators in the system who don't have initial access. But what we like to call them the domain experts on standby. They're available on an as-need basis so that if something came through that fell into their specific purview, think a Title IX coordinator or a mental health specialist or someone along those lines, they could be added to be a part of the triage and the follow-up and ultimately being able to respond back to the student athlete to get them the help that they need.
Yeah, I was thinking about that in relation to my teaching. And so I've had students in previous semesters who are struggling with mental health issues, and they'll tell me. And if I had an app like this, I could immediately bring somebody else in who could also be more effective in dealing with it. Is that the idea?
That's exactly the idea. We recognize that a lot of those sensitive issues, you are not trained, you're not the appropriate person to handle those, and there are people that are available. And that's the whole idea, is you want to connect the student athlete or whoever with the appropriate person as quickly as possible so the trained experts can intervene the right way.
And Karen, I think it's important to note that, because oftentimes when I have conversations with folks, they're like, okay, so you get the report and then you do what? And I said, well, that's what you need to understand is Real Response and our team, we don't see those reports. We are the conduit through which they go to the appropriate people, which are the people on their campus. And to David's point, being able to bring in those domain experts, situations where we have a campus partner who said we got something that came in and we knew we were not equipped for it, and being able to bring those folks in and they're able to communicate and ultimately be able to provide that student athlete with this resources that they needed.
So how do you go about training all of these domain experts to use this app and also respond quickly? Because sometimes this is about, well, it's obviously not checking email, which some people are really bad at, but how do you get them to be responsive?
Well, the beautiful thing is many of these people already are trained in how to respond. We are training them on the software. So we want to make sure that they're set up to your question earlier, have the right administrators in the system, make sure they're receiving notifications. By default, they can get email alerts. If they'd like text alerts, they can set that up as well. So it's really more about training them on the software and making sure they're confident and comfortable with how they get alerts, how they're responding back to. And then once things come in, we are not providing guidance on what they should be saying, how quickly they should respond, et cetera. Certainly we could provide, best practices and guidance based upon what we've seen from other institutions before, but we are the conduit. So we are setting them up to be able to respond back in a way that they feel comfortable with. Now, our platform does do a lot of things to help ease some of those burdens that, like what you mentioned, feeling like they have to respond quickly. And, one example of that is the messaging that's in the platform. So for example, if a student athlete is on the web page where they're typing up something they want to send, making sure all the disclaimers are there so they know if this is an emergency, they should be going here. Here's the local police department's phone number. Reinforcing that this is likely only being monitored during normal business hours, that they may get a response within 1 to 2 days. Those types of things become really important to be able to reinforce and make sure all the disclaimers are clear that what this should or should not be used for, and how quickly they should expect a response if they do send something in.
Yeah, that makes sense. And David, let's go back to you. You gave us the first 5 years of the company. You guys have since expanded. You're doing more on campus. Talk more about that campus infrastructure.
Sure. I'll bridge the gap quickly just on how we got there. I always felt like there was a bigger opportunity beyond athletics and college athletics specifically. For years we had campuses ask us, could this be used in other areas on campus? Greek life, et cetera. And our answer was always no. And the reason it didn't work was because the way the system was designed was for a specific group of people to be able to anonymously share communication, right? So the athletic department says, we want to upload our 500 student athletes with their first name, last name, email, cell. We only want to hear from them. We don't want fans from rival schools to send us false or frivolous things, et cetera. So to do that at a scale of, thousands and thousands of other students and staff and others just didn't make sense. Where that actually changed, ironically, in a year where there was so much change, was in 2020. During the pandemic, the NFL Players Association came to us and said, we want to have a season this year, which at the time was unprecedented. It was in those early months of the pandemic. But they said in order to do so, we need our players to follow COVID protocols. We can't have guys not wearing their masks or sneaking out of their hotels, because if that happened, they had to cancel their games, no questions asked, which literally had millions of dollars of consequences for them in the league. But what happened is they said the system as is won't work for us. We can't constantly change emails, cells, et cetera. They asked us to build out a text line, a phone number that they could put out into their ecosystem where players or others could just text in COVID concerns, COVID tips of protocol violations, COVID questions, et cetera, and make it quick and easy for those players to be able to communicate. I'm gonna connect the dots, I promise. So once they did that and they put out a release, other groups began to catch notice of this new anonymous text platform that we had as a way to supplement their more traditional ways of sharing concerns. So, for example, Major League Baseball, they had had a hotline for a long time that people could call into, or a web form that they could fill out. But the texting was really appealing to them as they dealt with that younger generation, that younger demographic, especially internationally, that may not feel as comfortable doing some of those more traditional ways that they had offered. Safe sport reporting became a huge focus of the national governing bodies that we work with, like USA Swimming. Again, same idea. We've had a hotline, we've had a web form, but we think texting would be really appealing to our membership. USADA, the United States Anti-Doping Agency, same idea. So more and more of these leagues and clubs and national governing bodies brought on this specific platform. And the light bulb went off in my head one day of, this structure is very similar to the college campuses. They have the more traditional ways of students being able to share concerns. They have the phone number, they have the email, they have the web form. But I thought the texting piece would be appealing because they're squarely in that demographic, that 18 to 22-year-old that lives on their phone daily. If you walk into, I'm sure, your common areas on campus, every student is looking down at their phone. And I joke with people, they're probably talking to each other, but it's just the world that we live in. So we began to go to some of our partners that we had great relationships with and say, we'd love to meet with your campus folks and show them this and see what they think. And sure enough, quickly, these campuses said, yes, we think this would be a really value add to our platform, to our reporting options on campus. We want to make it as easy as possible for people to be able to share needs and concerns with us. And texting certainly is the future. Because it's how people like to communicate. It's quick, it's efficient, it's fast. It's the TikTok generation, right? It's the very short attention span and move on. And texting fits that versus some of the more traditional ways that students have been expected to speak up.
Is this one way between students and employees, or is it employee to employee? If I was concerned about the behavior of one employee, could I report them as another employee?
It really depends on how the institution wants to set it up, but the short answer is likely, if it fits the same mold of what traditional reporting channels have been utilized for, yes. It's utilized by students, it's utilized by staff and employees. It could be about other students, it could be about other staffs, et cetera. It would fit the mold of whatever the current reporting processes are as well.
And Karen, I'll jump in here if I may. What we've not talked about yet is what I think really makes our system unique. And that is when a report like that comes in, whether it's to athletics or whether it's through this text, is the ability for the person receiving the report to be able to engage the person who's making the report to ask for further feedback, and for that person to remain anonymous. The traditional kind of, you go in, you fill out a web form, and you send it. I spent several years doing athletics compliance, and if you get a note slipped under your door, which happened back in the 90s when we were starting out, or you get an anonymous email, or you get a letter in the mail where they've been able to mail it from a different town and there's no way to track it. What do you do with that information, right? And campuses, I have colleagues who are, whether they're general counsel office or Title IX, they're like, we get these, but then it's like, gosh, how do we start that investigation? Or even in athletics. And the unique thing that our platform allows is for that ability to go back and ask those follow-up questions. And so I think that as I've talked to folks who are intrigued by this from a campus wide, I think that is something that they find very, very intriguing and very helpful.
I'd like to shift gears and talk about your new relationship with U.S. Integrity and the wide-ranging challenges that gambling brings to campus. So which one of you would like to talk about that relationship?
Sure, we both will. I'll start.
You start for sure.
So Karen, I think just to set the stage a little bit, we as a company are continually evolving, and we've been doing that since our inception to meet the current needs of college athletics. And we've seen that a lot over the years with different areas. What the last 12 to 18 months has shown us is this acceleration towards needs around, gambling and betting. And with some of the high profile cases that have obviously happened, but more and more states legalizing gambling, it quickly became apparent that this is going to be a huge focus for our partners that we work with. And Real Response being that anonymous platform, that safe space for student athletes to be able to speak up, gambling and sports betting related concerns is the natural extension of that now, where I think our partners knew that student athletes were going to begin to use Real Response to raise those types of concerns, right? Everything from actual illegal betting, misuse of insider information, et cetera, but also just this perpetuation of social media abuse, right? Where student athletes are receiving threats online as the result of a bettor's outcome not being what they wanted, or perhaps what they had even placed money on. So we knew this tidal wave was coming. We were beginning to hear it from our partners. I had been introduced to U.S. Integrity several years ago and begun to make a friendship with Matt and Scott there. And we just always stayed in touch about ways that we could collaborate and ways that we could work together. And earlier this year really came back in a more formal way to brainstorm, and we'll cover both, but in the last 12 months, we've really had two exciting partnership announcements with them. The first began with U.S. Integrity saying to us, we have a contact us form on our website, and people are coming to us now and basically just telling us things through our contact us form, anonymously sometimes putting their name on it. We need a more formal way for those types of things to come through. The contact us form is not the right way for people to share that they're aware of illegal activity, or an athlete to come through and to say they're being abused again. So we created Athlete Alert with them. So they took on our platform as an extension now, where the public, that's the key word, the public could anonymously alert them about those types of things that were happening. I don't know the exact number, but Matt had said to me that last year, I believe 30 roughly athletes had come to them and said that they were being abused on social media as a result of these game outcomes. And they work closely with the state gaming associations and the regulators already. So they're really trying to paint the picture in a more data-driven way of how big of a problem that this is. And it's been great to see, President Baker already getting behind this as well and recognizing the significant issue that, yes, sports betting provides a tremendous opportunity, but it also provides a tremendous amount of risk and those types of consequences that could happen. So we did that with them, announced it earlier in the spring. It was great, and they already saw tremendous traction. This fall, we came back together and we said, all right, how can we continue to expand our relationship? And the obvious next step was, all right, and we go back to what we mentioned earlier, these domain experts on standby. When sports betting issues come through Real Response, these institutions are not necessarily the right people that are trained to be able to intake and respond back to it, right? They want to do the same analogy as the Title IX issue. They want to get it in and then get it out as quickly as possible. So we came to U.S. Integrity and we asked, how would you all feel about providing a similar service to our partners, where if something came through, they could leverage your expertise? They have a team of investigators with tremendous amount of experience, where these institutions could pull your investigators into the thread. They could then be a part of the follow-up, the investigation, perhaps looking at the other side of the equation of what's going on through their proprietary software, their relationships with the states, et cetera, and to really chase down, are these things legitimate and need attention, or are they outliers? And to provide that benefit to our institution partners and to help de-risk these situations for them by having just this incredible team on their available on an as-need basis. So it's been amazing to watch that. Our partners were so excited about that opportunity, and to have those just incredible experts at their fingertips as needed once those types of things came through.
Samantha, what would you like to add about that?
Well, just that, David touched a little bit on the mental health component of it, and how when we first were talking with USI, it was kind of like, gosh, are schools going to want to use this to, is it going to be utilized because athletes are gambling? And I thought, well, that's interesting. But then when we met with Matt, and more times that I've spoken with him, to hear, and you read it in the paper, right? A student athlete who is literally doing, playing the sport that he or she loves, and because they make a basket when someone had bet against the spread, and they're making that basket, doing the game as they love so much, and then they're getting harassed for that, and their families are being threatened. And it's just another add-on when we think about what our students in general today, but our student athletes in particular are managing and are and what they're dealing with every day. They're balancing academics and competitive athletics like they've done for years, but now you've got this added on challenge, whether it's the pressure of social media and the access that individuals have to students through that social media. And so I think USI is doing an incredible job, not only in that kind of in their true business, which is ensuring that the games are remaining positive and what they're there for, but also to really seeing that other side of it and to say, no, we need to protect the people who are playing or the people who are coaching in it and their families. And so, I think it's an incredible opportunity. Gambling on campuses, it's changed significantly since since rules have been put in place where gambling is legal now on sports in certain states. And so we have to up what we're doing to be able to be proactive in that role. And I just think that what US Integrity is doing is incredible, and partnering with them is just another, again, tool in the toolkit of the people who are on campus doing this every day.
Let's talk about the role of another person whose role is evolving on campus, and that's the faculty athletics representative. David, you just co-authored an article that I read, thought it was really good. Talk a little bit about that article and also about the evolving role of the FAR.
It's interesting, and I've obviously had a unique perspective being a student athlete, having a FAR then, and then now working with so many institutions. And the article obviously focused on the evolving role of the FAR, which I think is perfect because the FAR role is evolving so quickly. Years ago, I think for some people it was just a title that some faculty like to have as a part of their responsibility at that institution without much oversight or specific job duties. And then flash forward to where we are now. And with the transformation committee, with some of these new developments that are happening, I think what folks are now realizing is the FAR is an incredibly important role, where it does serve as exactly what it's supposed to be, that representative between the athletic department and many times the president, or at least the institution, as that safe space, that third-party resource. And we've seen everything within our platform and how the FAR has been utilized. Sometimes the FAR is that super user, that person that has access to everything, just as an additional level of accountability. We're also seeing some institutions position the FAR as that external reporting line, where if someone felt like they couldn't go to their athletic department, or perhaps there was a conflict of interest with some of the things that they wanted to send, they could go directly to the FAR as that safe space to be able to communicate with. So I personally think it's a very smart decision. I co-authored that piece with Josh Gordon, who's the FAR at the University of Oregon, and he's just been a tremendous leader in the space. I think the FAR convention was last week, and I've heard from others, including the FAR at Iowa State, Tim, about how they're having these conversations of how can we continue to increase the FAR role? How can we position the FAR to be in a place where they are that trusted third party, and maybe third party is not the right term, but outside resource, that intermediary between the athletic department and the institution to do exactly that. And as we see with the transformation committee and others putting more of a focus on the FAR role, I think more institutions are going to position their FAR in that way. And certainly the added benefit of having a system like ours is it's easy to do through technology and to have some of those pieces in place immediately.
If I can jump in, Karen, also, yeah. I see the FAR role. I got used to saying FAR in my time role. It's also that person is a conduit between the faculty and the students, and student athletes and athletic department. And more today, that's an increasingly important role, to really, whether it's the faculty athletic rep being able to say, no, let me just, I've been on trips. I see these student athletes studying. I see what they're doing. They're not just skipping classes to go play games, and to understand, the role that athletics plays on an institution, whether it's a small Division III school or some of the largest, highest resourced institutions, but that these are students. They're part of the community on that campus, and helping both those student athletes navigate. We talked about it already, right? That ability to communicate. Some of the best practices are having faculty reps or a faculty member who is assigned to a team to be able to say, hey, listen, it's going to be really important at the beginning of your semester that you go and you meet with your faculty member who's teaching and let them know, I might miss some classes and here is why, and this is important to me, all the way to that faculty rep being able to be in a position of influence on that faculty so that they understand that that the students are going to be coming to you, and that it's not seen as this conflict and between faculty and athletics, right? That it truly is a relationship that can be symbiotic. And I think it's so important that role plays that, as well as being able to keep the president and the administration on campus apprised to things that are going on, not only in that one athletics department, but whether it's conference wide or on a national level. So I personally am thrilled to see the increase in the role, and it's going to be even more important that faculty athletic reps like Joshua Gordon and like so many of the other ones who are very good at it to be able to really impart their knowledge in ways that other faculty reps really begin to see what their role can be and how positive it can be for a campus.
They play an incredibly important role, and so many people don't understand what they do. So, Samantha and David, thank you both so much for joining me today, giving us some insight into how Real Response is trying to solve some real problems in today's world. Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolute pleasure. Appreciate all your work to raise awareness to these important topics in our industry as well.
Thank you, David.